On the upper Gulf Coast of Texas, between a town called Sabine Pass and a salt dome hamlet called High Island, there are about 20 miles of state highway that no longer exist. Not closed, not decaying, gone. Texas State Highway 87 still appears on maps, still runs 249 miles from Galveston to the Pine Woods at Timpson, but the coastal stretch through Jefferson County ends at a barricade, and beyond the barricade there is beach, marsh, and open water where the pavement used to be. In places, the Gulf of Mexico now sits nearly half a mile inland of the old roadbed. Out in the surf, travelers have photographed the rusted hulks of vehicles standing up to their wheeltops in seawater, one of them reportedly a Chevrolet Suburban that has been dissolving there for decades, looking, as one writer put it, like war relics on a Pacific island. This was a numbered, paved, state-maintained evacuation route within living memory. The ocean unbuilt it. That is the road we are talking about today, and the reason it died is not simply that hurricanes hit it. It is that the road, in a very real sense, was built out of its own seawall. To understand that, you have to go back long before pavement. Along this stretch of coast, where no barrier island stands between the mainland and the open Gulf, nature had assembled its own defense, a ridge of shell and sand thrown up over centuries, high ground in a landscape of marsh. Native peoples used the ridge as a trail. Spanish travelers used it after them. Civil War-era maps show a shore road running along it, and the ground remembers that war specifically. In 1970, road machinery working on Highway 87 west of Sabine Pass dug into the earth and pulled up cannonballs and crumbling kegs of black powder, buried in 1865 in the ditches of Fort Manhasset, a Confederate earthwork guarding the approaches to Sabine Pass, where in 1863 a lieutenant named Dick Dowling and about 4 dozen Irish artillerymen had turned back an entire Union invasion fleet. The highway was literally paved over ammunition. The modern road arrived in stages, the state designating Highway 87 in the 1920s, extending it to High Island on May 5, 1931, and tying it through to Galveston in 1936, and when engineers graded the coastal section, they used the material at hand. They bulldozed the ancient shell ridge and spread it into a roadbed. Think about that for a moment. The one natural bulwark this coast possessed, the ridge that had absorbed storm surges since before anyone kept records, was flattened and repurposed as the foundation of a highway, which meant that from the day it opened, Highway 87 was both the road and the seawall, and it was neither high enough nor strong enough to be the second thing. For a few decades, it held anyway. The beach road, as locals called it, became the connective tissue of the upper coast, carrying refinery workers between Port Arthur and Galveston, fishermen to the passes, families to the sand at what is now Sea Rim State Park, and, in the calculus that mattered most, it gave the people of Sabine Pass a second way out when a hurricane came, a westward escape running parallel to the one road north. In some stretches, the pavement ran within a stone's throw of the waves, which was the attraction and the death sentence in the same fact, because on this coast the Gulf is not a neighbor, it is a creditor. The collection began in earnest in 1980, when Hurricane Allen chewed away the beach and started the road's long decline. Storms in the mid-1980s broke it again. A county commissioner remembered that after one of them, you could still pick your way through to High Island on the damaged surface. The state patched, raised, relaid. The Gulf took the patches. And then came 1989, the year the ledger closed. In August, Tropical Storm Chantal drowned the road. 6 weeks later, on October 15th, Hurricane Jerry, a small storm by wind speed and a giant by consequence, drove its surge across the shoreline and destroyed roughly 20 miles of Highway 87 outright, stripping pavement, gutting the roadbed, erasing whole sections down to sand. Twice inundated in a single season, the state did something road-building agencies almost never do. It surrendered. The highway was barricaded, and it has been closed continuously since 1990, which makes it one of the rare cases in American history of a functioning state highway being abandoned not to a bypass, not to a freeway, but to the sea itself. The construction of highways has always been a story about conquering nature. Highway 87 is the story told in reverse. What followed the closure is the part that stays with me, because abandonment did not freeze the road in place. It put the road on a conveyor belt. Portions of the surviving pavement sat less than 100 feet from high tide in the 1990s. Hurricane Rita in 2005 and Hurricane Ike in 2008 came through like demolition crews finishing a job, shredding what the barricades had been protecting. And today the shoreline has migrated so far inland that the Gulf occupies marsh that once lay well behind the highway. Along the route, the ruins inventory reads like the end of an industrial age. Abandoned pipeline terminals rusting in the salt air, one that belonged to Arco, another to Kinder Morgan, slabs and stubs of asphalt appearing and disappearing under the sand, and those drowned vehicles standing in the surf, their paint gone, their stories gone, monuments to drivers who learned what the tide does to a stuck truck. And here is where the title of this video becomes literal advice rather than a figure of speech, because people still drive this route. In Texas, by law, the beach itself is a public highway, and four-wheel drive trucks and adventure motorcyclists still run the sand from High Island towards Sabine Pass along the Ghost of 87. Understand what that drive actually is. There is no road. There is soft sand that swallows tires, hard-packed stretches that end without warning, debris from a century of storms, incoming tides governed by a schedule that does not consult you, no fuel, no cell reliability, no services, and no one coming. The rusted hulks in the surf are not decoration. They are the drivers who got it wrong, minus the drivers. If you take a streetcar onto that sand, you are volunteering to join the inventory. Meanwhile, the absence of the road has hardened into a permanent civic wound. Sabine Pass, home to some of the largest liquefied natural gas facilities on Earth, now has exactly one evacuation route. And every hurricane season, local officials say out loud what a map makes obvious. A single road out of a coastal industrial town is a bet placed annually against the Gulf. Rebuilding proposals have surfaced again and again. In 1998 before the State Transportation Commission, in the 2020s from the Sabine Pass Port Authority, in polls and county meetings as recently as this year, and every time they collide with the same three walls. The cost? The environmental permitting, since much of the old corridor now runs through the McFadden National Wildlife Refuge, where millions are being spent restoring the very dunes the highway once replaced, and the unanswerable question underneath both, which is how you justify rebuilding a road in a place the ocean has already repossessed once. To the east, on the Bolivar Peninsula stretch that survived, the state spent over $20 million simply raising the pavement 2.5 feet to keep the tides off it. 2.5 feet. That is the current size of the margin between Highway 87 and the sea is not finished rising. So go and see it, from the safe end. Drive east out of High Island on the pavement that remains, past the beach houses on their stilts, to the point where Texas 87 stops being a highway and becomes a memory, and walk out onto the sand where the center line used to run. On a clear evening, the Gulf is calm and copper-colored and completely innocent-looking, tankers stacked on the horizon waiting for Sabine Pass, brown pelicans patrolling the break, and under your feet, somewhere beneath the sand or somewhere out beneath the water, is the shell ridge the first Texans walked, the ditch where Confederate gunners buried their powder, and the roadbed where families once drove to Galveston with the windows down. Texas has lost entire cities to this water. Indianola was a port to rival Galveston until 2 hurricanes removed it from the map. A 20-mile highway barely registers on that ledger. Nobody decided to abandon Highway 87 in any single meeting. Nobody signed a proclamation surrendering it. The Gulf simply kept presenting the bill in 1980, in 1985, in August 1989, in October 1989, in 2005, in 2008, until the only rational response left was to stop paying, and the barricades went up, and the road that had replaced the seawall was replaced in turn by the sea. On the coast, as one Texan wrote after walking this vanished stretch, nothing is permanent. The road proved it. The water is still out there, patient, glittering, half a mile past where the pavement used to end, working on the rest.